So first of all, how do you go about designing a game and creating the art and graphics for it?
So creating the art and graphics for the game. So this as I mentioned earlier, it was something that I struggled with initially because I couldn't decide on a direction to take, and I think by and large, my advice would be to follow your own instincts on that. Obviously, take feedback on board and so on, but it's about knowing when to listen and when to go with what you think is right. So once you have an idea in mind for how you want the game to look, I mean, what I did was I literally scoured the internet for artists every day, every night, constantly. I was on Pinterest, I was on Behance, I was on ArtStation, Instagram, Twitter, probably some others as well that I can't think of right now. But it was something I invested an enormous amount of time into, because I had really high standards for what I wanted the game to look like. And essentially what I had were 3 tick boxes that I needed people to be able to check. The first one was, was the quality of their work up to the standards that I was looking for? The second one was, could I afford them? And then the third one was, could they deliver in a timescale that I was looking for? So getting a yes to all 3 of those questions is really difficult. It's really, really challenging. But through perseverance, I was lucky enough to meet up with a guy called Hugh Teo, who's a phenomenal artist. I got so lucky to work with him, because I feel like, if I'd have approached him now, he would just be too big for me. Probably wouldn't have given the game a second look, to be honest, because he works for massive studios now. And so yeah, that perseverance really paid off in that respect. And I came close actually to working with another couple of artists as well, and both of them are really popular now. Both of them are hugely kind of followed on social media and so on. And so I think if you are prepared to invest the kind of time that you need to, then you can definitely find someone who can deliver, really great art at a budget that you can afford. So that was how I approached it. I mean, the other thing you have to bear in mind as well, when you're working on the art for a game, is you have to come to like a legal agreement around what happens with the kind of copyright, how these images will be used. There's all that kind of stuff to be aware of as well. And on top of that, then, so there are 2 main aspects to putting the art together for the game. The first is obviously having the illustrations done, and then the second is the graphic design work on the game as well, which sometimes the illustrator will also do the graphic design, or the graphic designer will do the illustration. But in our case, it was 2 different people. So I worked with a lady called Anka Albu, who was absolutely phenomenal. I can't recommend her highly enough. You can find her on ArtStation. And she basically took Hugh's brilliant artwork and made it better. I mean, I mentioned about her earlier with the kind of color blindness issues and all of that kind of thing. So what she did was she created a template for the artwork to fit. And she also kind of gave the board game its branding. So, talking about fonts, colors, that kind of thing. So you absolutely need both. Whether it's the same person who does both is irrelevant. You need both. And that was how we went about it. There's the other thing to bear in mind as well. Learning from my own mistakes. Art direction is a real skill. Like, if you're working with an artist, different artists have different working practices. So some like a hands-on approach, some like a hands-off approach. Understanding what your working relationship is going to look like is really important, and I think that's something you want to get a feel for at the beginning. It's not a simple case of just saying, here's my game, over to you. You go and draw it now, or anything like that. You have to. It's worth investing some time and some money up front to establish a kind of style that you'll be working to. Just so you go into it with open eyes, because art is one of the most expensive parts of making a game. So that investment, if you want to make the most of it and try and reduce any friction down the line, you want to make sure that you're on the same wavelength when you're starting out, in terms of how you're going to communicate, all that kind of thing. And I'll admit, when I first started out with Hugh, I'd never done any art direction before, and I was being too picky with some of the changes that I was asking Hugh to make. Like if he drew a picture of a cat, I'd be like, oh, maybe could that ear be slightly smaller? Not that wasn't an example. That's an exaggeration, but it must have been very frustrating for him. And as we learned to work with one another, we it became a lot easier when we both knew how we enjoyed working, and how much input he wanted and how much input I felt like I needed to have. And by limiting that, it was like any changes that I did request, we would take them on board wholeheartedly. So that relationship, I can't overstate how important that is. And as I say, it's a skill. You can study art direction, and it's something a lot of people won't have studied, and so you kind of have to learn it on the fly, like so much else do. If you're working on something like this.
I was blown away when I saw how deep Kris had gone to working with Hugh, and seeing some of the background process of that, because that process isn't just a case of I would like a cat, go. That's a case of writing an art description for what that card needs to be like, the feel, what the cat is doing, as well as what kind of cat it can be. But Kris is really good at providing references, visual references to film screen grabs or from other illustrations and stuff. So he sort of gives a sense of that, so that people understand what that process looks like. Certainly for working with you, he'll then send back sketches, like variant sketches, which then Kris will help choose from as to which ones he thinks are the ones he wants to work with. Those that then get sent back, and they'll get inked, and then they get colored. So there's multiple stages. So one of the things that I wanted to really highlight with people is how important process is, because you touch, Kris, on the idea of having fonts and your brand and everything created. You need to know what that feel looks like, because everything is going to be sitting within that. The frames for your cards, everything sits within that. So there are certain things that you need to get early on, because that is going to be a choke point for everything else that comes after it. And as one of those choke points that I think a lot of people miss is file structure. Kris and I have spoken a lot about, I hope you don't mind me talking about this. I think a really interesting thing that people will miss is like, when you receive your art, filing is really important. Like having a file that says, this is the name of the card, and this is the number, and this is the variation. So this is the sketch, this is the ink, this is the color, or whatever. And making sure that that file structure is applied to the entire game is so important, because you end up, when you're creating the art and the graphics, you have no idea how big your hard drive is going to get. It is just filled with hundreds, thousands of images like that really quickly, because you need to have these huge files because you want the quality to be high, but you've got variations of them. They all need to sit and work within maybe an Illustrator file or various other things, so that you can drag and drop them. Very quickly, you can get lost in a huge mess of different files. And I think that can really blow people away, because let's say you've put your cards together, you've pieced them all together. Okay, well, now you realize that you need to change one word on every single card. If you haven't got your file structure sorted, changing one word on every single card is going to be an absolute nightmare. Or conversely, changing a single character on one card and finding where that is going to be a nightmare. So a big part of it is not just the visuals, but it's is that really boring practical part of trying to just organize yourself. Because a lot of people who design games fall into two categories. They're either very number crunchy people or they're very arty people. And I personally fall well within that splashing paint round and being terrible at number crunching. And it amazes me to find designers like Kris who are able to really walk that tightrope that we keep talking about, of keeping things organized and having a level head about the process, but also really bringing in the creativity. That's something that the successful people are able to do when they make games. And if you are on one side or the other, you really need to understand yourself, that we spoke about earlier, and know when to reach out for help with people to bring in the other part, to bring in the organized part, or to bring in the creative part.
A daily job for me is always file organization and version control. Absolutely, always important. Most roles, and even on your own home machines, it's something that's really useful to do. But I can envision it being an absolute nightmare if you get it wrong with games.